I'm Greg Garbus of Four Season Tools. What we're going to talk about now is how to build an end wall for a movable tunnel. This end wall design we're doing here we call a wide open end wall. And what it does is that the bottom 4 feet of the end wall roll up. Above that there are 3 approximately 4x8 butterfly vents, and then there's also a peak vent. So in this end wall design we're getting a massive amount of ventilation by opening up almost the entire end wall. The bottom of the end wall has retractable studs. This allows you to move over crops in the ground or low tunnels. The height from the bottom of the stud to the bottom of the ground is just under 4 feet, allowing you to go over, again, tall crops or low tunnels. To build this, we build it very similar to how we build our trusses and how we get started. We put 2 stakes in the ground that are pre-tensioned by 1 inch, so since it's a 30-foot wide tunnel, they're in at 29 feet 11 inches. This is the same template we used when we built all of our trusses. We have laid out our hoops. We have 2 roof hoops, which are the long pieces, and on the top we've got 1 piece with a bend in it, and that's our ridge hoop. Those 3 pieces make the hoop. There are retractable studs, these vertical studs, and they come at different lengths. The outer ones are shorter than the middle ones because the middle ones go all the way up to the top of the tunnel. These can ship separated or can ship as an assembly. In this situation, they shipped it as an assembly, but to show the exploded view of the end wall, we went ahead and unbolted them and pushed them out so that you could see the inner stud and the retractable leg and the bottom of the leg. The horizontal pieces that are above and below the peak vent frames, those came bolted to the peak vents. So the first thing that we did was we marked which pieces go with which. So in here we have different marks that we did saying that this is G, this is H, etc. as we go, and we also marked what direction was up. That way, when we laid everything out, we ensured that the right vents are going to go back with the right studs to make sure that all the holes line up. The vertical studs have holes in them for the pivot bolts of the vents. These holes are off-centered up so that the weight of the vent will want to naturally close. The horizontal studs also have holes in them to bolt the vents shut. This we will really only use in severe weather, but it comes bolted together when it's shipped, so we unbolted it, marked exactly how it went, and then we laid it back out again. That ensures that when we build it, everything can be built properly. At the top of the vertical studs, especially the middle studs, there are telescoping ends. This sleeves inside of the 2-inch stud and allows adjustment to properly fit the vertical studs into the hoop tops. The peak vent frame comes as one big welded assembly. The top of the peak vent frame is installed to the hoops using the small aluminum end brackets, and the bottom of the peak vent attaches to the horizontal stud with its own retractable leg. So the stud is 2 inches, the retractable leg is 1 3/4 inches, allowing this to sleeve up and down inside of that so that we can adjust this and put our peak vent up as high as possible. Since we want hot air to rise, since hot air rises and we want to get it out of the tunnel, we try to put our peak vent as close to the top as absolutely possible. How we achieve that is with the retractable studs. Once we have this where we want it, we'll screw this together, making sure we don't put any screws in the way of the vent. And then the bottom, we retract the leg and we install it to the horizontal stud with right angle brackets. There will be some situations where we may need to cut a couple things to fit, particularly over on the outer studs. It's such a close dimension between where the outer stud touches the hoop. We'll need to cut this to fit and then use one of the small aluminum brackets to attach it. Now that you can kind of see the exploded view of the end wall, we're going to put our hoops together. We'll make sure to slide all of our brace bands onto our hoops before we put the hoops together. It's a lot easier to do that. On each side, we need a brace band for the peak vent. We need a brace band for the vertical stud in the middle, and we need a brace band for the vertical stud on the outside. Then we also need 2 brace bands for the purlin ends and another brace band for one on each side for the purlin end for the ridge. So we need, if I get my count correct, 6 brace bands on each side of the hoop before we put the hoop pieces together. After we do that, we'll show you how it all goes together once everything is put back into its place and all sleeved into itself. We're continuing to work on the 30-foot wide metal end wall, the wide open end wall that has the retractable studs on the bottom with the roll-up bottoms, butterfly vents in the center, and the peak vent in the top. We already showed an exploded view of all the different parts. The first thing that we did was we retracted the legs all the way down. The inner stud of the legs has 3 different holes in it. I have this piece here just for demonstration. The bottom hole is where the bolt goes to attach the leg. The top hole is for a bolt when the leg is all the way down. When we retract the leg into the stud, this is the middle hole that's used. So this is just for the leg, this is the up position for the bottom, and this is the down position for the leg. After we had the leg all the way retracted, we know that since this tunnel has a sidewall height for 8-foot spacing, that from the bottom of our hoops down to the ground is 63 inches. So using the same string that we used when we made our trusses, we measured up on each stud, from the bottom of the stud up 63 inches, and we put a mark. So now we know we can make sure that as we build the end wall, that we're building it at the correct height from the bottom up. So each of the 4 vertical studs now is a mark at 63 inches. After we had our marks, all of our legs were retracted down. We went ahead and slid the whole end wall up, put everything together, just dry fit everything. All of the horizontal pieces went onto the pegs of the vertical pieces, put it all together, and made sure that we were on our lines. The next thing we did was made sure that our end wall was correct right to left. And how we did that was we measured from the inside of our hoop over to the outer vertical stud on both sides and made sure that number was the same. Now we know that the height of our end wall top to bottom is in the right place, and we're also correct right to left. After everything was dry fit together, the next thing we did is start screwing some things together. So we're basically oriented properly within the hoop, but not attached to the hoop yet. Using our framing squares, we went and started at the center and made sure that we had right angles in all the joints. We put several screws. In this case, we used 3 coming down from the top into the peg, and then we also put 1 in for the side. We did not put any in on the underside or anywhere where any of the vents or doors are ever going to go. This end wall doesn't have doors. For this type of design, the doors are actually on the side walls. However, it is still important that anytime you have a vent or a door that you make sure there's no screws. After we had our different right angles together, working our way out, we made sure that then we had all 3 of our butterfly vent frames were square. Once those were square, we made sure we screwed in all the joints, the tops and the bottoms, and now we've got a good thing to start working from. We checked to make sure that our hoop was still inside of our template where the bottom of the hoops was on both sides. Again, we rechecked that our end wall was correct top to bottom and also right to left. This is a movable tunnel with a truss kit, so it has a collar tie purlin. So when we were dealing with our peak vent, we installed our collar tie purlin, the purlin end for the collar tie purlin, before we installed the peak vent so that we could get the screws in. The purlin ends, we used the number 14 screws, which use a 3/8 magnetic bit. The rest of the screws we used were number 12 screws, so they use a 5/16 magnetic bit. And the tops of the pieces, we handle them a little differently. The middle vertical studs we install with a telescoping end, and then our outer ones, we cut them to fit on both sides and used one of the aluminum end brackets. The top of the vent we want all the way up, so we also use the aluminum end brackets at the top of the vent. So the outer vertical studs and the vent are installed with the aluminum end brackets, and then the 2 middle vertical studs are installed with the telescoping ends. At this point, we have not used the telescoping ends or installed them for the bottom horizontal that attaches to the hoop. Since that sidewall hoop will be installed with the sidewall, we're basically going to end it right there, and then we'll install this piece and the telescoping end once the entire end wall is up. What we have to do next is take our peak vent frame and mount this in place. We are showing here that this is propped up so we can put our purlin end in. We're going to lower the peak vent frame into place, and we'll use these right angle brackets, and we'll screw our peak vent frame to the top of our horizontal stud. We'll make sure that our peak vent frame is correct right to left when we do this. All of our hardware is now dry fit. We have all of our bolts in but not tightened for all of our end brackets. We've also measured where our purlins go. So we have the purlin ends for our roof purlins in place, and we also have one for our ridge purlin. Once we're happy and we double, triple check that everything's exactly where we want it, we'll screw the bottom of the peak vent frame into place, tighten all of our brace band bolts, and then we'll be done with this end wall. So what we're going to do is go over just some final details. It's always important when you're building the metal end walls to realize that the inside is facing up. So going down is where the polycarbonate is going to go and going to be the outside of the tunnel. We do that so then when we're putting in all of our screws, we're not interfering where the polycarbonate is going to go. Same thing with the purlin ends. We have the 4 purlin ends installed. We've got 2 purlin ends for our roof purlins. We've got the purlin end for our ridge purlin, and we have the purlin end for our collar tie purlin. All those are installed. They're facing up so they go inside the structure. We squared off every right angle when we put everything together. If anything wasn't just perfect, we were able to take advantage of the 4-inch length of the pegs, slide it out, and make sure that we had it where we needed it to be. This has a sidewall height for 8-foot trellising, so we have 63 inches from the bottom of our hoops to the ground. We mark 63 inches from the bottom of the legs up to our studs to make sure that we are correct up and down. We measured the length between our vertical studs and the inside of the hoops to make sure that we're also correct right to left. We installed our collar tie purlin before we installed our peak vent frame to make sure that we could get what we needed to in there. If you forget to, you could always take your purlin end, bend it at a right angle, and then screw it straight into the stud after you have the end wall up. The bottom of the peak vents have retractable studs. Those are screwed into place. On the right angle brackets is a hole for 2 screws and 1 screw, so I went ahead and make sure that we at least have a couple screws on each side. We ensured that there were no screws anywhere where the vents are going to go on the insides for both the 4x8 butterfly vents as well as the 54-inch peak vent. When we separated the vents from the frames, we made sure to mark on all of them what frame went with it, so which one was on the bottom, which one was on the top, and which direction was up. That way when we put the butterfly vents back into the frames, we can make sure that everything lines up properly. After we had everything in place, we went ahead and tightened all of our brace band bolts. I like to tighten the brace band bolts before we secure the telescoping ends or the end brackets into the studs, because when you tighten the brace bands, it does move a little bit. So we go ahead and tightened all of our brace band bolts. After they were in place, we put several screws on all sides of the end wall studs that take the telescoping ends to make sure we've got a nice strong joint. We put a screw in every brace band, as well as made sure we had 2 screws in all the hoop seams. For the first end wall we build, we're going to go ahead and put the self-tapping screws into the brace bands for the purlin ends. On the second end wall we build, we're going to put the purlin ends on, but we're not going to put in the self-tapping screws. When you install the last purlin on the second end wall, you end up taking the purlin end off. You keep it on to measure it, the purlin to cut to fit, and then you put the purlin end back on. So that's why in the first one we usually put the self-tapping screws in, on the second one we wouldn't. So this is a complete end wall. Now that we have it done, we're going to move it out of the way, lay out our next end wall, keep our strings and our T-posts in place so that we can continue to build more end walls.